Cool. Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, which is part 1 of 2, we're sharing 5 things we'll each miss about Cade living at home. When we started this podcast, Cade was preparing to move out. Due to a timing shift with his roommate, starting grad school, and training and running a marathon, I was lucky enough to get a bonus year with him here longer than expected. Now that the actual time for my youngest to leave the nest is upon us, I'm both super excited for him and also fighting off tears thinking about him not being here. Gearing up for this transition has me thinking about what I'll miss about having him at home. Let's dive in. I'm Marci, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. I too have a list of things that I'm going to miss when I no longer live at home. While I'll be busy experiencing new things, I know that this transition might be hard for myself and my parents. So, Mom, what is something that you will miss once I'm in a new city?
I think one of the things that I will miss the most is your fresh baked treats and your new fresh baked sourdough bread and just your energy around food and healthy eating and just the being in the kitchen together, right? And watching all the fun ways that you cook and explore that and then share that with us. I think, it's been very inspiring for Tim and I to kind of watch you on that journey. And so the kitchen will be empty most of the time. But I also won't have to fight for space in the kitchen. We will definitely miss that for sure. So that is one of the things that I will miss is all of the cooking and baking and just having you in the kitchen. So how about you, Kate? What's one you'll miss?
I think one thing that I'll miss, just kind of first thing that comes to mind, is just that kind of the ease of our connection and our relationship. Obviously, living together, we see each other every day, we're talking all the time, whatever. So it almost is kind of like just our relationship, keeping our conversations open and stuff like that just kind of naturally happens. And I think we'll have to be, not I think, I know we'll have to be more intentional about, that relationship and those, times of talking and stuff like that when I move out. And I think I'll miss having just it be so simple, if that kind of makes sense, and have it be just kind of there and us, talking about random things or, something happens at work or with school or with my friends or whatever. Just it's easy to tell you right then and there versus having to say, oh, when are you free for a phone call or things like that. So I think I'll kind of miss that ease of the relationship.
For sure. I think there'll be more texting, right? Like those things that happen in the moment that you want to make sure you don't forget to tell me. And same with me to you, right? We'll have to text those like your brother and sister do with me now, be able to take that communication for granted. So what's the second things you'll miss?
For sure. I think a second thing that I'll miss is being able to experience what goes on in your life and in Tim's life firsthand and being able to be there, kind of like you just mentioned, of those texting moments of like, oh, this just happened. It'll just be a little bit different. I'll miss, if something good happens at work, you being able to come home and, you can kind of see the excitement in someone and hear it in their voice. And so I think I'll miss no longer having that and having to have, those conversations through text and over the phone and things like that.
Yeah, because it changes the immediacy, right? And changes the dynamic for sure. I kind of talk about that being in the daily orbit, right? And so it's like you're not necessarily in each other's daily orbit. Like I'm sure I will probably hear from you in one form or another every day, but just like I do with your siblings. But it's different when you're not in the house. So I think one of the other things that I'll miss, so my number 2, is just the way we're able to kind of flex and flow and have each other's backs. Like our schedules can get kind of crazy, or somebody's traveling or somebody, the other person is traveling. We've just been able to flex dog care. And, if I'm super busy, if Tim and I are super busy or we're traveling, you're taking care of everything at home and making sure the garbage and recycle gets out and the dogs are taken care of. And, we won't have that luxury of you having our back, maybe unloading the dishwasher extra few times or folding a load that needs to be in the dryer, those kinds of things. Same thing with you. Like there's times I know I think it might be a little bit lopsided because you're really, really a super naturally helpful person. And you just see when things need to be done and you just do them. So I will definitely miss that, just each other having our backs on the daily. So, and then that brings me to my number 3, what I'll miss. And I think some of that will just be, and this has been the case with all of you kids, but you have friends and significant others and things that become a part of our lives. And it's very easy to like be a part of that part of your world when you just had a conversation with somebody and you're like, oh, my roommate just said, or
Hmm.
oh, my cousin just said, or whatever that might be. And even talking to grandparents, like you'll talk to the grandparents and then I usually find out what you talk to the grandparents about. But
Hmm.
like, if you're talking to them from where you're moving to, I might not necessarily, or you might not remember to tell me, but there will just be that kind of the things that happen in your periphery, the joyful parts of your life and those relationships you have with other people. You'll be making new friends I won't hear about probably, and it
Hmm.
might be a really long time before I get to meet them. And so that is very strange as a parent. Our house was always the house where like everybody landed kind of, and I knew all your friends, and some of them still keep in contact with me even like outside of their relationship with you.
Hmm.
So I will definitely miss that part. So that is my number 3. What about you, Cade?
For sure. I think mine, or I think I'm going to comment on yours first. I think that that is definitely, a very valid thing. And because it's kind of like you said, if something happens with the grandparents and you're on the phone with them and they tell you something, it's just kind of natural instinct for you to tell me or vice versa. So I think not only do we feel more connected, but you feel more connected to, my friends. I feel more connected to your friends, the extended family and things like that. So I definitely think that's a good one. Mine kind of relates to your second point, but just that like feeling of having someone to kind of fall back on and have your back. If I know that I'm not, going to be home to feed the dogs or something, I can, tell you. Or I know if I leave my towels in the dryer, like you'll take them out and put them in a basket so you can keep doing your load or whatever it is. And I know, for the most part, I think myself and then also you and Tim kind of handle our own things very well. But there are times just in life where, things either get busy or whatever, and you kind of fall back on those responsibilities. So being able to have someone that's kind of there to catch them and, make sure that things don't get too far behind, I
Right.
definitely will miss.
Yeah. So how about your number 4, Cade?
For sure. The fourth thing I think I'm going to miss is, which will kind of actually come before I move, but with you starting a new job where you'll no longer be in the house all the time, I think I will miss that. And, just having that kind of closeness and being around each other and being able to, especially in this past year or two, as, you've really kind of focused on your life coach business and, your personal health and things like that, being able to be there for you to support you through that and see the progress you've made and things like that on a daily basis. So I think, obviously, like I said, it'll happen a little bit sooner before you move or before I move. But with you starting a new job, I think it'll be a little hard for me to make that transition. And, just because for the past, what, maybe 2, 3 years,
Three
you've been
years.
working at home consistently. So, for the past 3 days, unless, one of us is traveling or I'm somewhere else or whatever, for the most part, we've, are together most
Yeah.
most of the day. So I think that that'll be an interesting transition, and even, just being home and coming up to work and not seeing you in your office across the hall or things like that will definitely be a little bit of an adjustment.
Yeah. Mine is similar and it has to do with holidays. So you have always been very like into holidays and like planning the meals and planning what we're doing as a family and all of that. And your sister's still here in town, thank goodness. So like I probably will still get lucky for those little one-off holidays where we've gotten together like Easter or 4th of July or things like that, like may still have those interactions right with your sister and her boyfriend. But there may be holidays where like no one's home, and
Mhm.
you've always been so excited about the holidays and the preps and, helping with the decorations and that kind of stuff. And now it's like, Tim will help if I ask him to, but he'd be okay if we didn't have all the Christmas decorations
Mhm.
that we have. Or, he knows if it comes to me, like I'm not going to make all the Christmas cookies that
Mhm.
you always made. So I think surrounding holidays, like that's just going to be different. And
Mhm.
I always used to think when, I'd see my grandparents or other older people in my life, like downsizing their tree and going to like the tabletop tree and all that. I'm like, oh, that's so sad. Like, but then when you stop and think about, you're like, as you're aging, it is a lot of work to do all that
Mhm.
for every holiday. And so not having you around to help with that, I think I'm really going to notice that
Mhm.
for sure.
For sure. I think like you said too, there's some things, just specifically talking about holidays, but there's some things that are very important to you that you're going to, make sure happen every year. You always make sure that the lights are up outside the house every year, and that, the decorations might not be up till a few days before Christmas, but they're always going to be up at Christmas. So I think a lot of those things will still happen. But like you said, it's those little things like the cookies, which is something that I've kind of taken over, some of the meal planning or things like that that maybe aren't necessarily as important at you. Like I know you're not a big dessert person. So I think that, holiday time comes around, I think if anything takes a back seat, it'll start to be those things like cookies and things like that.
Yeah.
Which, although you're not the biggest fan of, they've been a part of our holidays for the past however many years. So I think missing that, I definitely understand how that will be hard. But what would you say your fifth thing that you're going to miss the most is?
So the fifth thing for me is just your energy, right? Like your energy in the house, specifically like that youthful energy, right? So, when you get older, you spend a little more time potentially sitting. You might need to rest more. You might not be able to tackle things at the speed at which you did when you were older. That's just a natural part of aging. And even when you're trying to keep yourself very healthy and on top of things and intentionally moving more, it's just as a natural part of the aging process. And so having a young person in the house like just really kind of pushes you to move at a little bit faster speed than what might be natural for you. So little side note, y'all know we got Echo, the little Cavapoo, last year, and her energy has been great in the house, and she's now only 1, so she's also getting a baby sister. So there will be some young energy in here, but it will be young puppy energy, which might make Tim and I even more tired than we can be as older adults. But I think it will be the energy of having you in the house. Would be my number
For sure.
5. So how about you?
My number 5 is going to be kind of missing that sense of childhood, just being around the house with you. And I was just thinking like things like using the, pots that we've always had growing up and like using those to cook, or just different things like that. Like having, we just got a new couch, but like being able to sit on our family's couch or things like that have kind of been staples in the family, I think will be a hard adjustment. And kind of like you talked about earlier, I really like to cook and bake. And so I think that there's almost kind of that sense of like, oh, I really like the containers that we keep our flour and sugar and stuff in. And so like being able to find new ones of those for myself, or, this is my favorite wooden spoon to use, or different things like that, I think will kind of be a hard adjustment. Because like I said, it's kind of that sense of childhood of like, oh, these are the pots I've always cooked with, or this is the spoon I always use, or whatever. And like having to one kind of find new ones of yourself, but also not having that connection anymore. But I think that that's just kind of like a natural part of growing up and moving out and stuff.
That there's not really a history to, like, you lived on your own for a very short time. So like, for instance, kitchen stuff, like you just unpacked all that stuff and repacked it for a long distance move. And I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but like there was a little bit of excitement and a rediscovery of that stuff. That's kind of fun, but there isn't that history with that stuff. And so I think, it won't take very long for that history to develop and for you to get comfortable and get to pick out your own stuff. So, but yeah, it's funny because I wouldn't have thought about the pots and pans and the wood. So that's why we have these conversations.
Exactly. And it's funny because like, those pots or whatever, you probably got at, Target or Walmart or wherever, wooden spoon you just bought whenever you're going to the store when you needed a new one or whatever. So it's not necessarily that it's, some valuable family memorabilia or whatever, but it's just as kind of like, if you grow up and every time, your mom makes soup or pasta or whatever it is, it always is out of that pot. It kind of does have that little like sentimental value to it.
Well, the pots aren't going anywhere. I'm not replacing stuff. So they'll still be here for you to use to cook for us when you come home.
Exactly. When I come home, that's what I'll be looking forward to. Well, thank you for sharing those, Mom. I hope that both parents and their bigs that are facing a move out situation are able to take a few minutes and think about what they'll miss and share it with each other. I think that, we've had conversations like this off the podcast and then also having this conversation on the podcast, has been beneficial, one, to myself to hear what you're going to miss, but two, a lot of things I maybe didn't realize until I really sat down and thought about it, about what I'm going to miss. And, things have a way of working out exactly as they're supposed to. And I'm looking forward to my new adventure, but I'm sure this is just the beginning of the things that I'll miss when I move out.
Yeah, I imagine there'll be some phone calls, just like there was with your brother and sister when they first moved out, as you're making
Hmm.
these adjustments, and you don't realize what things are important to you necessarily until all of a sudden you're without them, right? And so that will be different. But while you are off living your, new big city life, your parents are going to be here holding down the fort, trying not to miss you too much. But I'm sure my list will get even longer once you're away too. So I try not to think about it too much right now, because I should not have worn a pink sweatshirt on a day when my face was going to turn red and teary. But anything else you'd like to add before you close us out, Cade?
Not much. I think it's just important to remember that this is, a natural cycle. Every kid moves out of their parents' house. You moved out of your parents' house at some point in time. My grandparents moved out of their parents' house. So it's nothing that's never been done before, and everybody feels these feelings. But I think it's important just to feel them, and it's also another reason why it's important for bigs and their parents to have a good relationship, because you're able to have these conversations and talk about those feelings. But with that being said, that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Make sure to tune in for part 2 of this episode, where we'll talk about 5 things that we're each looking forward to with this big shift in our family dynamic. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little more joy-filled for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. And a new episode is released on those 3 platforms every week.
And you can visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com, or email me at lifecoachmarci@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marci, and Instagram at life_coach_Marci. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
My handle across all social media platforms is at the Cade Berrigan. That's where you can find me. The best way to contact us or give us feedback is to DM either one of us on social media, or to reach out on the Contact Me page on my mom's website. We appreciate any feedback or topic ideas that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.
Bye, everybody.